Hello, my name is DJ Studios and welcome back to my channel. After Doctor Who Series 12, I decided that I wanted to look back at Classic Who and talk about that in more detail, because once I first started trying to watch Classic Who, I felt quite alienated by the whole thing. There were reviews out there for episodes, but I didn't really have any recommendations of stuff to watch. So I've decided to create this series when I recommend Classic Doctor Who. I haven't come up with a title yet. Roll titles. I've always wanted to say that. Got you. Do you think you get bad luck if you don't open the umbrella fully? Because I've just done that like 4 times. The best way to describe Battlefield is the idea that you're fighting a war, and this war is by forces that are out of time and they're using Earth as their battlefield. So you wanted fights, you wanted battles, you wanted, big CG effects, basically you're making The Hobbit, but you only had whatever was in the back of your pocket. And that doesn't go very far. So the idea is there for Battlefield, but I feel like the execution is what lets it down. When you're younger and you film videos of you and your friends like playing Star Wars, whatever, and you're playing with the lightsabers and you're smashing into each other and you're thinking this is really cool, you film it and then you look back on it a couple of months later, actually being a grown-up, and you look at it and you realise, God, I was weird. But that's something, that's a different thing. But you look at it and you realise that all you've really done is just hit 2 swords like that together over and over again. I think that's most of Battlefield basically summed up, to be honest. While I was filming that bit with the lightsabers, while I was just sitting here doing this, my dad was holding the other lightsaber, and I looked really weird. He just thought, what are you doing, son? You should, get a job or a hobby. So the baseline how I'm judging these episodes is that it's based on the pacing, the effects, and then the overall story. So the pacing, I feel like the pacing's pretty good. You have 4 episodes, you've got plenty of scenes to laugh at, and they're not for good reasons, but still. 4 episodes isn't too bad. I did hear in the behind the scenes stuff on the season 26 DVD that they actually had 3 episodes planned for this one, but actually had to extend it to 4, and because they didn't restructure the episode, some of it seems a bit off. Episode 1 is definitely the worst. It is really quite slow and very bad in terms of production value. First off, I think, is the pacing. I think that it's entertaining enough, but not for the right reasons, because you're constantly watching the terrible choreography. Episode 1 is definitely the worst out of a lot of them. I feel like episode 1 has some really strange bits in it, like whatever is happening here. And boom! It was clearly meant to be a 3-part episode originally. In fact, I checked on the DVD stuff, and originally it was supposed to be 3 parts. It was supposed to be 3 parts, but they extended it to 4, so they didn't even restructure the thing that much. So that's why the first part kind of drags, but once you get past that, it's actually quite a decent episode. The effects. No, they're terrible. Can we just move on to the next section, please? There is one moment in episode 1 that has characters almost lifted up, and it's shot so badly it's almost like they're being quite literally pulled up by someone, or they are on really terrible wires, and it's supposed to be an explosion. All the pyrotechnic stuff is pretty cool though. There's plenty of practical explosions that look really nice, and the costumes, the setting, it's all pretty cool, but it's just like goddamn choreography that I just can't get out of my head, and it spoils everything surrounding the episode. Production value is the final section. I think that this was supposed to be the on-location episode, and I don't know whether this would cost more, but it felt like it was going for a lot more than it actually physically could do. It felt like it was going for this big war, and the budget of Doctor Who just could not cope with that the entire time. From episode 1 onwards, there was just nothing that was somewhat a little bit cheap. I think the design of the creature's pretty cool, but apart from that, if you're just starting off with like Doctor Who classic stuff, don't watch this episode. It's not a good one, and many people don't like it. In fact, I just thought it was kind of okay. I'm quite partial to watching terrible stuff, so I was quite happy just to see some really bad choreography, even though I like to complain about it as much as I can. You know, just there's a certain pleasure that I get from watching terrible stuff. Yeah, so this episode, it's okay, but I'd suggest that you don't watch it. So I'm not gonna recommend it. The next episode of season 26 is called Ghostlight. Ghostlight is what I would define to be the studio episode. Everything is filmed basically in one location, but luckily it's a period piece, so it's really well done, and BBC seem to specialise in this kind of stuff. And it's since I was born, I'm not quite sure about the 80s, but Doctor Who, to be able to take the costumes, etc. from other shows of the period and bring them into their show. Ghostlight is a short period episode in which the main characters face off in a small sort of country house against a ghost with the power of light, hence Ghostlight. I wouldn't say it's your conventional Doctor Who story, you know. The bad guy normally shows up around the end of the first part if it's 4-part episodes, but this one's only a 3. They will show up at the end and then they'll be around for the remaining parts. But for this, they don't appear to the end, and before that you've kind of got the whole ghost idea. In fact, they quite clearly put in these characters called like husks during episode 1, so that there are some kind of villain for you to be interested in. But there's also a little bit more to it than just villains. And speaking of the villain, they look like they've just been pulled directly out of Flash Gordon. And turns out they were. I think the pacing's pretty good. They don't go very far with the story, but it's 3 parts and that's basically the shortest you can get, so you can't really complain. The production value of this episode is high, but I wouldn't say that you're really going to be expecting explosions and, you know, etc. I think period episodes are done really well in Doctor Who because they have all the costumes and etc. You know, because of this beautiful setting, it kind of allows me to forgive things such as the weird blob of light around the villain. Because of that, it's quite contained, it's quite small, which is partly a positive and partly a negative. For Ghostlight, I think I definitely have to recommend it. I think it's a really fun 3-part episode, and after Battlefield being something a little bit, yeah, I came into Ghostlight with just a clear mind, trying to think of, you know, it's okay, it's the next story, who cares? And Ghostlight really took me away from it. I really thought, wow, this season was really good, and that's why I recommend it. Oh yeah, there's also a woman who jumps out of a window at one moment. Oh no! The next episode is The Curse of Fenric. The previous episode that I talked about was quite contained, quite small. This one goes a lot bigger. There is a lot more explosions, etc. in this one. Within this made-up location, I think it's made up anyway, the character of the Doctor and Ace appear in this sort of coastal town, but there's also a bunch of military there, including some spies that I believe they're Russian. The pacing of this episode is really good in my opinion. It starts off a little bit slow, as most Doctor Who stories do, but then it really builds up at the end until you have this almost epic. I heard, I believe it's one of the writers, talking about how they love the idea that the Doctor and the villain kind of jump around each other. All of this stuff might be happening in the background, but the Doctor and this villain are having their conflict on a more personal level. You know, they're fighting within the explosions. Speaking of villains, the practical effects to these things are really nice. I believe they're made through like casting, so they would cast on almost like barnacle sort of stuff, mould it, place it on their faces, and it looks really cool. They look really scary. I'd hate to like be walking down a street or a beach, and then one day, and then they'll just sort of appear and out of the water. It'd be really, really creepy. And there's like the main one, and the main one is really well designed. Like, I was really surprised that they spent so much money, well, I imagine they spent quite a lot of money on making him look the way he does, because there's so much there. You know, they could have taken the easy way, but they went for something that was quite creative. There's also plenty of sort of background stuff, so there's lots of interesting things going on in the background, such as guns and soldiers and army stuff, so if you're interested in that. And there is also tons of like pyrotechnics, like big explosions and things, as I've mentioned enough already. The money really seems to be high on this one. They spent so much stuff on this that I was generally shocked by the scale of it by the end. You know, I thought, oh, it would just be like a fun Doctor Who story, but then I was like, do you know what, this is building up to something that I just wasn't expecting by the last part. And in between the sort of the boring bits, then you have some really brilliant characters. Nicholas Parsons plays a brilliant character who kind of struggles with his faith now that he's understood the idea of aliens and creatures that, well, vampires, as he puts it. I wouldn't say there's a dull moment in the latter half of the episodes. You know, the first part, like most of Classic Who, is rather dull, but once you get past that, it's a really, really fun story. And where they filmed it is absolutely beautiful. Like the rocks, the coast, it's just a beautiful place. So that means that I definitely have to recommend The Curse of Fenric. It might be my favourite of this series. In fact, it is. We're doing survival. I don't feel very safe in here. During survival, Ace and the Doctor go home. Well, they go to Ace's home, and I really am partial to these episodes. These ones are the ones that I really, really love, because it gets me to understand the companion, and it kind of grounds the idea of the Doctor. I can watch for as long as you like things in space, but I don't really care unless it's generally affecting the real world. So Ace comes home, and there's a bit of a mystery. Something is taking people away. And then the Doctor spends the first half an hour having a walk around chasing after a cat. I think that the episode itself, like the pacing of it, is pretty decent. I think that it starts off a little bit slow, as I mentioned before, but it's still entertaining. There's still that element of what is happening. There's some mystery there. And it definitely goes straight into the plot. You know, you're greeted with some very fun stuff in the first episode that continue out for the rest. In terms of effects, I would say that the overall aesthetic of the episode is very 80s. You know, there is a moment with a sort of guy with sunglasses on and a leather jacket on a motorcycle. It's very 80s and I love it. I wasn't even born in the 80s, but I just think it's a very cool stylized time when like things like that were just normally on the television. The fursuits are great. The ones that they use for the cheetah people are really, really nice. I would say that the production of this episode was lower than the others, you know, but I think it was still pretty high. I think there's something beautiful about how Classic Who can make television be entertaining while doing it on such a restricted budget. There's a few moments in the box set when they're talking about how, oh, we were going to plan to do this, but we ended up not doing that because we didn't have any time. We had to get that filmed, and if we didn't, you know, we'd miss the deadline, which means it wouldn't get filmed. It just, so much could go wrong, but they just had to hope and work with what they had. I'd say Survival is rather ambitious. There's some really cool ideas in here. You know, the way that they use a quarry for the cheetah planet is rather cheap, and you kind of see the way that they've tried to change the sky in some shots towards the end, but it's still pretty fun to watch. And so I recommend the last episode of Series 26, which is called Survival. There's also a beautiful line at the end, which they added in when they kind of knew it was coming towards an end, and I think that's pretty sweet. So that's the end of this video. My look into this classic series is done, all of Series 26. I'm planning maybe next time to look at the War Games, because it's 10 parts long, and I think that would be an interesting one. And that's something that I've been wondering for a while. Is I know it's a big story, but I'm curious whether that story will actually be worth watching. So what do you think of Season 26? I think it's pretty decent. We've got 3 recommendations out of the 4 episodes available. So I think it did pretty well. It's a very fun time, I think, the 80s and the Sylvester McCoy era, and quite a time that they tend to sort of skip over because they're like, oh, it's not Tom Baker, but like Sylvester McCoy a Doctor that I didn't watch until quite a while after watching Classic Who. So I suppose some people kind of skip him, but I think that he's really good and you should definitely watch him. So I'm still working out the little dents and stuff within this series. I think next time I'll probably change production value and effects, and maybe because they're too similar that it's quite difficult to choose how they sort of fit and what goes into each category. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure you give it a like, subscribe if you are new, and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.